everybody. My name is Ashley Rindsberg. I am a journalist, as mentioned. I'm also an author. The book is called The Gray Lady Winked. If you've got your phones open, go to Amazon, buy it. I'm also someone who's been in and around media for my entire career. That's about 20 years at this point, a little more, a little less. And that's all to say that I'm here to talk about this topic in the framework of media and what this means, because there's just no getting around it. There's this great quote that I love from Fran Lebowitz, an important New York figure of the 1970s and 80s, who said at that time, actually it was in a Scorsese documentary that she did on her, that the media has replaced all institutions. And that's certainly true in the United States. Whether that's true in Europe, I don't know. But what we are seeing is that the media has played into this dynamic, and in some ways it's precipitated it. It's really played this pivotal role in feeding us the meat we need to tear each other apart and to tear our own societies apart. It does it day after day. It's got a financial incentive to do this. It's motivated by clicks and page views and time on page, and bloody stories about whatever it might be do really well, and so do stories that are radicalized in their own nature. I think a lot of you in this room probably have heard the term clash of civilizations. And I think there's obviously something very astute about that term that Huntington coined or at least used prominently. But I think what we're looking at today is actually a little bit different, which is clash of civilization, singular, because this is a clash of a civilization within itself. We are at war with ourselves, and again, thinking about the way that the media has fomented this war, I'll give you one example, which is in the lead up to the pandemic and during the pandemic, we saw this really rise to a crescendo in a very nightmarish way. So we have in August 2019, the New York Times, it was the subject of my book, so I know it more intimately than most other outlets, did this huge initiative called the 1619 Project that they published. It was a full issue of the Times magazine, and it was really dedicated towards reframing American history from liberty, which is our traditional story that is told in America, to slavery. And they even put it in the name. 1619 was the year that slaves were first brought to the colonies. So the idea was to say 1776, when America declared independence, was not the true starting point of the nation. It was actually started in slavery. And even more to the point, and this is where things got a little weird, is that they considered America to be a slavocracy in their terms to this very day. So in everything from traffic jams to high sugar foods to the healthcare system that's a bit broken in the United States is all a remnant of a slave society, and it's why these things exist today in the way that they do. So this on its own is a very sort of audaciously breathtaking move. But the real problem came after the publication of the 1619 Project, when a bunch of scholars from top-tier universities came out and said, what you're saying can't possibly be true because it's not supported by the academic literature. So in one case, the New York Times even went out to a fact checker, a professor of African-American history at Northwestern University, with a particular fact. And the fact was that they were trying to claim the American Revolutionary War was fought to preserve slavery, and she just told them flat out, no, that's just not true. And in her words, they printed it anyways. And this is the real point, is the facts didn't actually matter, and the facts were there to be subverted. It was the whole objective of the 1619 Project. This all happened right in the wake of Trump becoming president. What happened in journalism after Trump was elected, and even when he was just a candidate, was these same institutions started to come out and say, we need to rethink what we consider the true ultimate values of journalism to be, and that was generally understood to be objectivity is one of the main ones. The Times did a front page story by their media columnist, Jim Rutenberg, in August 2016, that was called "The Challenge Trump Poses to Objectivity." A few years later, they had a Pulitzer-winning reporter named Wes Lowry come out and say very much the same thing, and that was the idea that objectivity, I'll read you the quote. Conversations about objectivity, rather than happening in a virtuous vacuum, habitually focus on predicting whether a given sentence, paragraph, or article will appear objective to a theoretical reader who is invariably assumed to be white. So what Larry was saying, and he later said to a group of students at Columbia Journalism School, that we have, quote unquote, fetishized objectivity. What he was actually saying was that objectivity is an artifact of white supremacy. And this tie is an interesting tie, obviously, but you might think that they would see objectivity as white and therefore it's bad. I don't think that's actually the dynamic. I think what they saw was that objectivity itself was bad, therefore it is white. The whiteness was a way to use it as a sort of a lever or a cleaver, maybe, to chop it to pieces. And that was really, I think, the point of this entire movement we've seen in the media since Trump's initial candidacy. And that's, I think, where we're starting to see this merging of clash of civilization with clash of civilization, plural. The reason I say that is because when you look at 9/11, another seminal moment in American history, modern American history, we have this initial attack. And the attack itself was horrible, and it was very traumatic for Americans, but it wasn't the real attack. The real attack is what came in the subsequent 20 years, where we started to hear that, and actually began right after 9/11, where we started to hear that this was America's fault. This wasn't a bunch of Islamist terrorists committing a massacre against innocent civilians. This was actually a just retribution for America's own misdeeds. And that itself was this kind of the first big moral turn away from an objective view of the world. And it was also carried by the media, which started to examine this notion very, very quickly after 9/11. We also saw the same type of attack and shifting of the moral perspective after October 7th. So what we saw was, again, a horrible initial physical attack, but that wasn't the real attack. The real attack is everything that came after that, which is the delegitimization of an entire state, a people, and it was the same thing with the United States. The real attack is delegitimization, and that is the point of this attempt to dislodge objectivity that we've seen carried through in the media. So what's key, I think, is that we're at a turning point. The one thing people don't talk about, we talk about the horrors of October 7th, and we've talked about the horrors of 9/11, but particularly in Israel, because it's a bit of a different case, and I lived in Israel for 20 years, I'm actually Israeli, just by my accent, is that on October 7th, Hamas also set off what I call an identity bomb. It changed people inside of Israel. It changed their enemy. It made their enemy that they had seen previously as being somewhat relativistic in their view, almost Western in that way, and kind of more interested in lifestyle and pleasures and this kind of thing, getting on in life. And they concretized their enemy into something that had to believe in itself because it had no choice. And this idea today that you can accept all perspectives, including the perspective that you should be dead, is a luxury belief. It's a luxury belief, what we're seeing play out in European capitals, in American blue cities and blue states. And I think it's only until the point that you no longer have the luxury to have that kind of belief that you will not see change. But I think what we're seeing from Israel is that change is possible, and it's there when it's forced. Sometimes it's a bit too late when you get to that point, and it becomes far more tragic than it needs to be. But that's how history often does play out. So in closing, I think what we can say is that the idea that the media has put into the world that 2 + 2 does not equal 4, or might not equal 4, depending on who you are, where you came from, what your background is somewhat over, at least in the United States. We saw that with the election of Trump, and we've even seen it now with the media sort of kissing the Trump ring, with people going to Mar-a-Lago from the media to say, okay, we did call you Hitler for the last 8 years, but you might actually not be so bad, because the people have eventually had their will and they have spoken. And we've heard this theme touched upon earlier, but the media is changing, and the media is almost being overwritten by a public that now has access to its own media. And I think that's going to have a profound impact as we go forward, as we confront this objectivity crisis. And in sum, what I would say about it all is that I think there is a lot more hope for the future than one might think, looking at the present. Thank you.